Welcome to the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona. As the monsoons roll in, it is my honor to connect with a woman who's leading the global initiative, the Global Twinning Network. Andrea Arbel, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, how you doing? So happy to be here.
I want to ask you a question because I want you to talk about the diaspora of the Jewish people, where they originally were from. And I ask this because I was talking to some Mardi Gras Indians, a guy named Juan Pardo, a beautiful musician, and we were talking about the idea of cooperation between Native Americans and slaves. And what he was saying was there were African cats here before slavery. They obviously increased in numbers. And somehow in Western civilization, we have this conception that Israel, that's where the Jewish people came from. But can you talk about the diaspora of the Jewish people? I know this is a passion of yours.
So it is a passion of mine, and what my work enables me to do is really straddle both worlds as somebody who grew up in the United States but who's been living in Israel now for 31 years. But the diaspora actually emanated from Israel, and there was the big dispersal out of Israel, and ultimately Jews really traveled and created communities all over the world, whether it's throughout Europe, former Soviet Union, Africa, North Africa, Middle Eastern countries, and that's really what we're seeing today is the legacy of the dispersal, if I want to put it in a positive light, the legacy of the dispersal out of Israel thousands of years ago, and ultimately coming to the new world of America. That's where my family came from. My father came from Germany, my mother from the Ukraine, and settled here, whether it was before World War I, looking for a better life, after the tragedy of World War II, seeking haven and refuge. So that's really a lot of reasons for the dispersal. And
why do you use dispersal as opposed to diaspora?
It's diaspora. I mean, dispersal meaning when they left Israel.
So this is important for the people that are watching this. Is not only does how it involves in your work, but the idea is Israel was the original birthplace of the Jews. Mm-hmm. Why did they have to leave?
Well, they left because they were essentially conquered more than once. The temple fell once and the temple fell twice, and therefore they had to leave. They had to run. And they ran and found refuge, sometimes better refuge, sometimes less good refuge. There's been a lot of very dark chapters of history, whether it was in Portugal, whether it was during the Inquisition, dark history certainly in World War II, whether it was pogroms. So they dispersed, but then they settled. Okay, they dispersed and they created the diaspora Jewry as we know it today, which is like any other community, has its beauty, in some places thriving, in many ways thriving as a renaissance of Jewish renewal, and in many places, in many ways, also being very challenged in terms of when it's looking at its future.
Can you talk about the challenges? This is important.
Challenges stems from, I think, a few reasons. Challenge just in the facts demographically. The vast majority of non-Haredi, non-Orthodox Jewry are marrying many different people, and their children are being raised, maybe they're being raised Jewishly, maybe they're not, but they're clearly the products of interfaith families. And I think that the opportunity, while that's a challenge, but I think it's an opportunity, and I think it's an opportunity for all of our communities to embrace all interfaith families, children thereof, and embrace them. They're part of the family. We want to keep them part of the family.
But it's not a wholly Jewish unit. I mean, my family is an example of that, where it's multi-faith. But how do you overcome that in terms of keeping the traditions and the culture of our people intact?
I think that there's many ways, and maybe the way that it's going to keep intact moving forward is not going to be exactly the way it's been intact till now. And I think that probably the way that our generation and my generation, the generation after me that's been doing Jewishly, isn't exactly the way our parents' generation, my great-parents' generation did Jewishly. I certainly do Jewish ritual differently than, as I say, my parents, my grandparents. And I think that's something that we need to understand, that doing Jewishly may look differently. I think the point is, though, as long as we're doing Jewish in one way or the other, that's a way of being Jewish. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be doing Jewishly with the state of Israel. It could be doing Jewishly in my local community. It can be doing Jewishly in my house, in alternative ways of expression that are new and cool and engaging, whether it's children of interfaith families or children not of interfaith families.
Why don't you take both of them? A family that is completely, take the two different examples you just used and how you would deal with them.
Well, I just want to say Birthright, for example, and there's a new program called Honeymoon Israel, is just that. They're saying, come have a taste of Israel. And this brings me really to the work that I do, the work that we do in the Jewish Agency, and that I do as the director of the partnership unit. And one of the ways that we try and engage members of our family, members of the tribe, it doesn't matter how many of the parents or grandparents are Jewish, okay, just the members of the tribe or people that want to be members of our tribe, one of the ways that's effective is to engage them with Israel. We know that one way is if you have a meaningful experience in Israel, if you have a meaningful experience with Israelis, that will somehow, some way, many times, impact the way you feel Jewishly, perhaps the way you do Jewishly.
How?
And that's why the greatest philanthropists of this country, of this nation, invest in Birthright.
Wow.
Right? They're not giving a free trip to Israel because parents can't necessarily give a free trip to Israel. It's because they want to change the culture and they want to make it as easy as possible. They say, come to Israel, come on a free trip to Israel. And then the hope is that once they've seen and discovered their roots through Israel, in all different aspects, that they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to go back home and I'm going to explore, I'm going to do, and it will shift something in their emotion and their something inside of them. What we do in partnership, one of the things I do is I head a partnership together. Tucson has an amazing partnership together program with a community called the Kiryat Malachi Chof Ashkelon in Israel, and that's like a Jewish sister city relationship. And that's what we do also through partnership. We try and engage as many target populations, as many institutions, organizations, initiatives in any given Jewish community, and through partnership, engage them with Israel. But our uniqueness is that we engage them through joint activity with Israelis, so that when you're done, you have a friend in Israel, you've stayed at a home in Israel, you've stayed like with somebody like me and my chevre, me and my gang, and you've had a chance to sit in their kitchen and have a cup of coffee and stay overnight and shoot the breeze. You may have been on a people-to-people program that has engaged teachers with teachers in school twinning, just like that happens in an amazing way here in Tucson with Kiryat Malachi Chof Ashkelon. And it could be that you're engaging artists with artists and doctors with doctors. And here you're doing this joint activity based on affinity groups, based on your passion, musicians with musicians, and this is an artist with artists. But at the end of the day, we want people to have this amazing experience in people's homes, because what's going to bring you back to Israel, and what's going to really impact you, is you're going to remember the people you stayed with, you're going to remember the friends that you made, you're going to remember what you ate, you're going to remember the smells. And that's what's going to bring you back time and time again, just like the people of Tucson to Kiryat Malachi. And Kiryat Malachi, well, it's a lovely town. This is not Tel Aviv on the beach, and this is not Jerusalem. This is a town. And what brings them back is because they have family there. This is where they care about.
Andrea, going back to our history lesson, who were the Jews displaced by or conquered by when they had to leave?
They were conquered by then the Romans, for example. I'm not the greatest history.
No, this is important though, because what I'm trying to get at is that after World War II, who was living there when the Jewish people were allowed to retake their homeland? Okay.
So before World War II, if we really want to go back to who, in more contemporary history, who was in what is today Israel, Palestine. Before that, there was the Ottoman Empire for about 450, 500 years. The Ottoman Empire, just like the British Empire, as many empires do, it fell to the wayside. And who stepped into the Levant, meaning Palestine and what is today Jordan, what is today Syria, et cetera, was really the British mandate and the French mandate. And they had kind of divvied up the Levant, and then they pulled out. So the British actually pulled out of Palestine, and they said, of course, with the UN resolution, we're going to do a two-state, we're going to partition what was the British mandate in then Palestine, and they're going to give a portion to the Jews living in Israel, recognizing that the Jewish people should have a homeland for positive reasons. And again, if I go back to the history of the Jewish people, also for in a sense darker reasons, but first of all for positive reasons, that this is the historic homeland of the Jewish people, and of course have a state for the Arabs that were then living in Palestine. And of course we all know history, that was not accepted by our Arab neighbors. And after the first day of dancing in the streets in May 1948, the War of Independence began before we even got to wipe our brow from dancing the hora in the brand new city of Tel Aviv, and war broke out.
Just for history, because we're living in this era of fake news, I just want to be very clear. In history, going back in history, it was the Jewish homeland dating back to what year?
Dating back to about 3,000 years.
Thank you very much. 3,000 years, the original birthplace of the Jewish people.
There's a lot of archaeology, by the way, and I don't think anybody
Well,
disputes
people,
that.
I mean, I've never thought I'd be at the day where it was like, a C student gets more props than an A student. So, I mean, all I'm getting at is that someone talking to you who's able to articulate this, it's very important when people all over the world are watching this and want to hear about it. But I interviewed this cat, Jerry Ostro, who used to be the CEO of Bausch & Lomb, and he works with Chuck Lavelle, who's part of the Grapevine, which is very much involved in the birthright, and because they've done so many surveys, so much data collection. And there's about 4 different words that come out of this country when they talk about Israel. It's religious, war, nothing, and Jewish. I mean, it's very limited. And a lot of that has to do with our corporate media construct in this country. But I'd like you to talk about the twinning, how the twinning has enlightened people, maybe give some specific examples of people that didn't know what was going on before the twinning.
Well, let me tell you this. Before, what you're sharing with me, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if I'm not mistaken, in Israel did this. They wanted to rebrand Israel. And when you're rebranding, you're doing focus groups, right? Because you have to understand, before you actually go to do the branding, you have to do focus groups. They did focus groups internationally, not just Jewish, mainly non-Jewish. And what they found out when they asked people, what's the color that you most associate with Israel? Do you know what color they said?
Go ahead. Tell me.
Gray. Now, anybody that's been to
Gray
Israel,
area.
if there's one thing you would not describe Israel being, it is gray. When they asked about people in the streets, you know what was missing in the landscape of Israel according to these focus groups?
Trees.
Women.
Women.
So think of in Israel, for any of you who've been there, no, the country is gray and there's no women. So this just goes to show that people are a little misinformed, have the wrong impression of what Israel is, because if there is one thing that Israel it is colorful. There are stunning women in the streets, and let's it's stunning or not, lots of them. So it just goes to show the ignorance of people who are not there. Okay, even when I talk to sometimes young Jewish people, they think of camels, like as if there's camels just walking the streets of Tel Aviv. So I think that what we do in partnership together is that, first of all, it enables people to not only get to see Israel, get to meet Israelis, but to have a much more nuanced understanding of what is going on in the country. Good. First of all, they get to see the arts, and they get to see the culture, and they get to experience the fine cuisine. Anybody who likes good food, this is the place. If you're a foodie, come to Israel. The beaches, the overall level of day-to-day freedom and how you live your life. Is Israel perfect? No. No place is perfect. No place is perfect. And there are ups and downs. I love Israel. Do I always like Israel? Not always. Do I love Israel? Always. And even when I'm mad about one policy or the other, I stay there and I stick there because I want to influence it for the good. And what partnership enables people to do is have that nuanced understanding. You don't turn your back on family. Just like if there are some people, because anybody who saw the results of the American elections, there are some people, I'm sure, that are not happy with the person who was elected president. I'm sure there are many people in this country who are not happy with some of the policies and direction that President Trump is leading America. Do you turn your back on America? Are you saying it's not mine anymore? Absolutely not. You stay and you influence it for what you believe in. And if we as the Jewish people believe that we have to have one strong nation for the Jewish people, then you stay and you try and influence as you believe best.
Can you talk about the Knesset, in particular, what's going on as it relates to the women's movement of women are strong. I mean, they'll probably lead us out of the abyss. I sure hope my daughters do when they get to be of adult age. But in the Knesset specifically, can you talk about the most pressing issues that face women and versus the sort of the old guard philosophy?
Well, first of all, I think that women have a good, solid place in Israel. If you're looking even today in the...
Why do people think there are no women, though?
That is beyond me. I don't know why people have, why do people think, out of this survey that they did in advance of the branding, why they think Israel is gray. If you'd have told me that it's kind of, camel colored because of the sand, if you think of Israel as, having lots of deserts, so you think of, like Tucson, it's kind of beigey colored, I could understand. But right. Gray, gray for me is cement. Israel is far from being filled with cement. So I don't know. But I will tell you that there's still a way to go. And I want to preface this by saying there's still a way to go. But you will certainly see tremendous inroads in terms of women in Israeli society, in all sectors of society, whether it's in the army, whether it is in banking, whether it is in high tech, whether it is in the NGO, my own organization, the Jewish Agency. I have to say in terms of executive and in terms of very high-level positions, I have many, many female colleagues, and I'm proud of that in the Jewish Agency. So I think that women in Israel feel that nothing really can stop them because they're a woman. And I think that's probably crucial. And there are organizations, by the way. There is an organization called Keren that is dedicated to giving women the I would say the empowerment, believe in yourself that you can go into politics. Politics can be a daunting environment for a man, let alone a woman, let alone a woman, let alone a man.
Well, especially if there are these, precepts that are put in place, I don't know what the right word is, but I guess talk to young women out there about how they should approach being part of public policy and civic involvement.
And I think that what's changed also is even in the 30 years that I've been living in Israel, there used to be much more of a feeling of the men's club.
Yeah, that's the right word. It's the men's club. Yeah,
the men's club,
the boys' club, which is what Trump is doing here. That's the boys' club here.
Okay, the boys' club in I think in Israel really emanated from the army. That you rose in the army, and the result is you retired, you finished your stint in the army as a general. And there was among the major leaders, and this is natural, and I get it. There was a natural transition to government. If you look at Yitzhak Rabin and Sharon and Barak, these were all generals, and we're going to see more. And on the one hand, there's something very natural about that. But that shouldn't mean that women cannot get to the top tiers. And there are women in the top tiers. Look at the government even today. Look at previous government. Tzipi Livni had a very leading role in government. And if you can look at Aliyah and many others in this government, you cannot say that there are not women in
Sure.
very high positions, whether you like them or not. That's not the point. If you're asking about women and breaking the glass ceiling, women break the glass ceiling all the time, and I think we're beyond breaking the glass ceiling. I think that's my point.
Can you talk specifically about the twinning partnership with the Tucson Hebrew Academy and the Jewish Federation here in Southern Arizona? I mean, I interviewed one of the teachers, Danielle Weiss, on my program a few months ago, but I just wanted you to talk a little bit about some of the feedback you've gotten from the, I guess, just the knowledge and the empowerment of it because of what we've just been talking about.
Sure. The school twinning program that takes place within the construct of the overall partnership is one of the strongest pillars of this partnership. And I think one of the reasons is because twinning engages the school as a community. Okay, it's not just about the students, but it is about the students. It's not just about the teachers, but it's also about the teachers. When they do delegations, it's about the families as host families. So one program actually gets to impact the entire ecosystem of a school. So that's getting a big bang for your buck. And how are you? You're impacting them by the kids get to meet Israelis.
Explain how that works to the people around the world. Explain.
So there's a joint program that they're doing. It could be around the same moon or any other program. But what takes place is that the teachers, with the professional support, build a joint program for the year. I deliberately don't call it a curricula. I call it joint activity for the year, joint work plan for the year. And the students engage sometimes. For example, if there's a class here and a class there, they engage on their own. But then they, in a sense, have those kissing points where they engage together, with all the technology, whether it's Zoom, whether it's video conference, whether it's Skyping, whether it's doing things virtually. And so they get to engage together. They do similar things together. They get to know each other, whether it's through, as I say, emails and, using all the safe digital tools that there are out there. And then many, many times they also get to meet each other. And when they meet each other, as I say, they stay in each other's homes. The teachers over the years develop a working relationship, which of course is also a personal relationship, because after every year you look back and say, how can we do it better? Let's tweak it. Maybe we should do it this way. Just like in education. Education, no matter whether it's through twinning or on its own, is always an ongoing evolution of development. So they're constantly also developing the program to make it better, more relevant all the time from year to year. And as I say, I think that the most important factor here is it enables the children to get to understand Israel through their friends. And suddenly, Israel's not faceless. That yes, there are girls out there. They wear a color other than gray.
They're planting trees. They're planting trees all the time.
They're planting trees, and they're sending each other, Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova cards, and they're doing Tu B'Shvat seders together, and they're doing seders together as well. Whatever it is that they choose to do, suddenly, I see you, I know you, you're my friend, and Israel's not some godforsaken place with no women and all colored in gray. And I will say, I think that this also motivates them to want to come to Israel later on. We see this time and time again, that kids that are in school twinning, they're so motivated to come to Israel to do like some great program, whether it is Onward or Masa, whatever it may be, but it's also because they have a chance to see their friends. And I hear endless stories of wonderful friendships that have lasted the years. Not every friendship does, but many, many, many do. And you know what? Even if a friendship lasts 5 years, amen.
Andrea, talk about we talked about the multicultural dynamic of Jewish families now. Can you also address the idea of younger people who would like to go to Israel and live there? How you address some of the economic factors? It's becoming very expensive to live there now. And, can you live, you'll see these things and you say the top 10 cities in America, most affordable places to live, and how do you budget and how do you do this? Because, we're, for a variety of reasons, there's just, that's what it is. And so can you talk to younger people out there about how they should address the economics of Israel?
Israel is, there are some things about Israel that are very expensive, and there are some things that Israel are not very expensive. There are sectors in Israel that if you work there, you'll be just fine. If you're working in many of the professional sectors, as I say, you can make a very nice living. If you're coming without, I would say, academic degrees, that can be a little more challenging. I will tell you, for example, people who are interested in sending their children to day school, come on to Israel. You get the best Jewish education basically for free. You don't have that huge expensive Jewish day school hanging over your head. Instead of having in America, when you start thinking about having kids, right, that's when you start wanting to start setting up a fund to save every nickel and dime for your child's private university education. So in Israel, you don't have to do that. because university is extremely, extremely affordable. There's tremendous opportunity for scholarships for anybody who cannot afford the price of university. But what you do want to save up for is housing. Housing is the one thing that's very expensive.
Why? Yeah, why is that?
I think it's a matter of supply and demand. Israel, I'm talking about size-wise. We're small. We're a small market. I
Size of
always
New
say,
Jersey, yeah. I mean,
how many bottles of milk can you sell every day in Israel? Even if everybody buys one bottle of milk, that's not America. It doesn't have that scope of a local market,
Yeah.
and we don't actually get to export very much to our neighbors. Think if New Jersey couldn't export to New York and Delaware and whoever's on their borders, and that the only place that you could actually export to is is South America and Europe. So I think Israel has been incredibly creative in creating those markets.
you got a flash flood warning.
Israel's been incredibly cutting edge when it's come to high tech. It's been incredibly cutting edge when it comes to high tech agriculture and finding those markets, let alone things like diamonds and other things. But I think for an average individual who would like to make Aliyah, I would say this. First of all, come to Israel, experience Israel. And if you love it, find the place that you would like. Come knowing, understanding where your skill sets are applicable to the Israeli economy. English is a big deal, okay? There's a lot of people that use their English in terms of employment. I know I did in the very beginning. So there's all different ways of being creative, and I think that anybody who really wants to make Aliyah, is dedicated, is a hard worker. For the most cases, I think that most people can really make it and make it okay.
Andrea, when you talk about the spirit of the Jewish people, can you talk about a time in your life when your creativity and spirit, where you had a breakthrough in your life? It could be in any capacity, but to me, a lot of my show has been fueled by spirit, and I wanted you to talk about that in your own professional or personal existence.
Well, I'm going to go back for a minute to 31 years ago when I made Aliyah. I had 1,000.
Can you tell people what Aliyah is?
Sure. When I decided to move to Israel, I was a nice Jewish girl living in the United States, fell in love with Israel, and I decided I wanted to go there to see what it would like to be there. Finished college, thought I was a ganze mensch, with $1,000 in my pocket, and I moved to Israel. Actually went on a program, which was like an internship program to kind of help me get a social network and begin to work. But I think that my biggest breakthrough on a macro level was when I was given the opportunity, really the privilege, to head up the partnership unit, and what I've been doing now for about the past 10 years. It has been truly a privilege, it has been an inspiration to help Jewish communities across the world create meaningful and living relationships with Israel. I lived in the diaspora, I love the Jewish people, I live in Israel, I love the state of Israel, and what could be better and more inspiring than waking up in the morning and creating those relationships across the Jewish world. And I think that's probably, I wake up, I always say I just work a little too hard at my hobby. I think that sometimes, there's a little lack of division. I could be a little better at dividing private life with my work life, because I get up and I just, okay, what's going on today? Is everything always perfect? No. Is everything always, in relationships, you can have ups and downs,
Yeah.
and there can be external factors that affect you, because in 2008, wow, there was a huge economic bust in some of the communities here, and that impacted things. But for the most part, partnerships resonate in local communities, meaning here stateside, because it helps strengthen local community through that relationship building. We impact Israelis because suddenly they understand through this engagement with overseas Jewry that they are part of the Jewish people and they have responsibility, and that we have a shared fate. And at the end of the day, that shared fate, and part of that shared fate is ensuring a thriving, healthy, democratic Israel, that this is something that we need to work at together. And I think that we're interlinked, and if one is weakened, it's going to weaken the other by default, one way or the other. And I think that's something that we all need to be very much aware of, and as they say in Hebrew, litalot, get above and beyond the politics of one moment or the other as knowing a as concerning, as frustrating that they may be, and keep our eye on the ball of where we need to go for future generations. That doesn't mean that you don't want to raise your voice. That doesn't mean that you don't want to work for what you believe in. But let's not lose sight of what we want for future generations. Let's not lose sight of that.
I agree. I'm curious about how your point of view of the United States has changed since now that you lived in Israel for so long, and being that you were born here. Can you talk to people that, like myself, I've never been there, okay? And so
we need to fix that.
Yeah, of course. Everyone says that. And, it's fine. I look forward to that. But there are many other people. I mean, I grew up very culturally Jewish. I feel very close to it. So I'm just thinking that. But you grew up here, and then you fell in love with Israel. And so when you come back here, how did your point of view change?
Well, the interesting thing is I feel like I discovered the Jewish people through my job. I grew up very culturally
through your job.
Jewish. Through my job. I grew up very, very culturally Jewish. Both my parents, my father came when he was 16 from Germany. My mother came as an infant to Canada. But really with that immigrant Jewish community. And as I say, I grew up very culturally Jewish, religiously Jewish to a certain extent. We belonged to an Orthodox synagogue. We kept kosher. I grew up in Jewish neighborhoods. All my friends were Jewish for the most part. But I was young, so I wasn't involved in federation. I didn't even know what federation was. We didn't belong to a JCC. We were culturally Jewish through our synagogue, and that's what I knew. And my father was a big supporter of Israel. We were not a wealthy family, but my father did everything he could to support the state of Israel, and that was the conversation around the dinner table. Israel was huge. And when I came back now through my job, I discovered the beauty of Jewish community, which I was not. When I mean Jewish community, I mean the organized Jewish community. That's something that I discovered. I am always in awe.
What is the difference between that and the familial?
Wait, I just want to say that I'm always in awe of the lay leadership, of the professionals that work day and night and are so generous of their time and resources to making sure that there is a vibrant Jewish community, whether it's here in Tucson or in anywhere else. The time and resources that they take to raise precious resources for the state of Israel, for Jews around the world. I'm in awe of that. I was not aware of that when I left, for the most part. I left, I was 23 years old, fresh out of college. I hadn't had the opportunity to really get to know that. So today, in retrospect, I will tell you, when I come back and what do I understand what it takes to keep a thriving Jewish community going. I understand and am concerned about the mega challenges that there are because of just changes worldwide. Changes in philanthropy and trends in philanthropy. It's the changes that we're experiencing here in the Jewish community is something that's being experienced across the whole world. The whole notion of collective, that we can do more together, is lost on the younger generation. Everybody wants to donate, and build a well somewhere in Africa. And while that's nice, you don't build a country that way. And you're not able to address really the mega issues. And I'll even say, even in a local Jewish community, if everybody just wants to donate and build a well, you're not going to have a thriving Jewish community. There has to be a sense of collective. If I talked about keeping your eye on the ball, we need to put our collective resources together to ensure we have a thriving community that can be as inclusive as possible. That is the goal, that is the challenge of any Jewish community here in the United States and around the world. So it is beautiful, it is being challenged.
Why is building a well not a significant? I mean, is it a lack of a wider view, a little more long-term view? I'm trying to understand what would be, in your mind, a cogent way to build a community. I know
I'm just picking on wells.
No. I mean, I understand, but to me, it's like, is it too short-term view? I'm trying to figure out what you would.
I think it's too short-term, and I think it's a little less, and I think it's less strategic.
So what is the most strategic way to talk to younger people who really are not even really aware of what you're really even talking about, because they've been trained to go through this very step-by-step process in order to get to the next step?
Well, you know what? I'm sitting here in the Jewish Federation of Tucson.
Southern Arizona, that's right.
Southern Arizona. And I'm sitting here, and the the Jewish Federation raises funds, okay, to be able to provide resources to the greater community. Federation doesn't raise funds to fund itself. It needs to fund itself, but that's not the point. The point is, what is a Jewish community? Jewish community means that you have synagogues, and you have JCCs, and you have day schools, and you have summer camps, and you're able to provide subsidies for kids that want to go on Birthright, and you want to be able to provide subsidies to the kids that are going on Masada Israel, and you want to be able to bring missions, and you want to be able to provide subsidies in anything and everything that you want to be able to do in a community. And there's probably a really long list of things that I didn't mention. And somebody needs to be able to fund all or in part. And you need to have a central fundraising organization that then can then provide those funds. And once that's the way Jewish community was understood. Federation was going to raise those funds, and they were going to ensure that there's going to be funds for schools and JCCs and subsidies and what have you.
Yeah.
And what's the alternative? The alternative that every single thing that somebody wants to get done in a community, everyone's going to have to go out and raise their own dollars. And you're going to end up with a very fractured community.
This is interesting. How do you
you're
bring?
able to get a group of people around the table, in this case it's Federation, that's the institutions that we have in place, I honestly believe in it. And we're saying the Federation is designed to do two things. It's the way we build our local community, by the way, JCRC, and it's about providing assistance to the elderly in our community and families at risk, Jewish families at risk, et cetera, et cetera. I'm saying there's a long list, and give me another minute, I'll come up with a lot.
You're doing all right.
So Federation is raising funds really for two main things. How do we sustain a thriving Jewish community locally? And how do we do our part in supporting the state of Israel, being involved in the state of Israel, and Jewish communities in need outside of Israel? That is what Federation raises money for. And you need to have what I believe is collective funds. People saying, I trust in you, I want my money to leverage other dollars.
Yeah, it's trust.
And it's trust. It is trust. And
when you went to
Israel,
Israel,
the whole world of philanthropy, not just Jewishly, is about, I want to know where every single dollar goes, and I don't want to turn the electricity on in a building. Well, if we want to have all this, we need to have electricity. We need to have the best damn professionals in place to be able to do what we believe in, and it does demand resources. And I think that kibbutz mentality of us that was so intrinsic in my parents' generation, and I can talk back about the Jewish political tradition of where I think that emanated from, but is lost on the younger generation. And I'm afraid and I'm concerned if that this is where philanthropy is going to be going, we're going to have much more fractured community. I don't know if we'll be able to address those huge, big issues, because very small NGOs can do only so much. Do some of them end up growing into bigger initiatives? Yes, absolutely. And you're seeing some great and creative things out there. But
can I ask you about your viewpoint on the leadership here in the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona, the Jewish Community Center, THA, and all of their offshoots, and what you think they're doing most effective, and what you want to see them continue to grow doing?
Well, I've only been here for a day, and the way that I engage with the community is through partnership and is through school twinning, so I don't want to be able, so I can only talk about what I know.
Just talk about the people. Talk about the people.
But I can tell you that there is amazing professional and lay leadership that I got to know a little bit before, over the years working with this community, and also and the past couple of years, you have amazing CEO here in your federation. Stu Mellon is fantastic. He is a leader. You have Oshrat Bar-El, who is the director of the Wine Israel Center, the Weinberg Center, who is amazing. She is I know Oshrat because she was a director of one of the partnerships in Israel. She was part of my team. I had the privilege of working with Oshrat when she was part of my team, and now I have the privilege of working with Oshrat working here. And she is a bundle of energy, but more than that, she brings tremendous leadership and vision to how to maximize the partnership platform for Tucson and its connection with Israel. And I think they do it stellarly. I think they do it strategically. And I said that to them today in meetings. The partnership has grown under Stu and Oshrat's leadership. And again, there's all the lay leadership, the chairs of the Joint Steering Committee, the Israelis. There's a lot of people that make it happen. But at the end of the day, you need to have, as they say in Hebrew, the kodkodim, the people at the top that really set the tone and lead it forward. So the leadership that I can tell you that I have experience with over many, many years is just amazing. You should be, I think the entire Tucson community can be really proud of it. Proud of them.
Andrea, it was great to talk to you. I'm just going to ask you to sign off in Hebrew to the world, to all the people around the world. Thank you so much for being part of the Jake Feinberg Show. It's an honor to talk to you, Andrea, and continued success with everything, including the twinning program here.
Thank you very much. תודה רבה שהזמנתם אותי. היה לי כיף להכיר אתכם, והיה לי יום נפלא להכיר את האנשים המתנדבים שמשקיעים כל כך הרבה כאן בקהילה שלכם ויחד איתנו בישראל. אז שוב המון תודות וכל טוב.
We'll see you in a little bit.